Iran has been striking out against other Gulf states in the wake of Operation Epic Fury. Now one of those states has had enough of Iran trying to push it around. Saudi Arabia just delivered a warning. Stay out of our airspace now or else. Even the US is shocked as the Gulf states are preparing for an all-out war that they didn't start but are determined to finish. "We will not shy away from protecting our country and our economic resources," was the stark warning delivered by Saudi Arabia's foreign minister, Prince Faisal bin Farhan, delivered on March 19th that his country's patience with Iran was wearing extremely thin in the wake of yet another attack by Iran against Saudi Arabia's territory. The prince added that Saudi Arabia has reserved the right to take military actions if deemed necessary. Translation: leave us alone or we'll hit back. The potentially Gulf-shattering warning comes in the wake of yet another ballistic missile assault against Saudi Arabia conducted by Iran in response to the joint US and Israeli strikes against the Iranian regime. On March 18th, Israel launched an attack against the Iranian-owned portion of the South Pars gas field, which is one of the largest offshore natural gas fields. One of Iran's responses was to send ballistic missiles into Riyadh during the night, all of which Saudi Arabia says that it was able to intercept. This attack also seems to have been purposefully timed to coincide with the meeting of senior diplomats and foreign ministers from a number of the Gulf states and other regional powers in Riyadh. Delegates from countries like Turkey and Egypt were in Saudi Arabia's capital city when the Iranian missiles were shot down. And according to Prince bin Faisal, this more than anything else showcases how little Iran cares for any sort of diplomacy. Prince bin Faisal's warning came during the morning after, but it's clear that Iran isn't heeding the call to stop its attacks. On March 22nd, Arab News reported that Iranian missiles and drones were flying once again. Saudi Arabia was still a target. A trio of ballistic missiles flew towards Saudi Arabia on the day of the report, one of which was intercepted, while the other two landed in uninhabited areas. Saudi Arabia also intercepted 23 drones in this attack, which Iran has launched toward the kingdom's eastern province. That Sunday's strike followed a Saturday when Saudi Arabia's air defenses had also been called into action. March 21st saw those defenses take out 62 Iranian drones, again launched toward the eastern province. What we're seeing here is a pattern of Iranian ballistic missile and drone launches against Saudi Arabia that is showing no signs of slowing down. As of March 22nd, Iran has fired nearly 600 of its Shahid drones at Saudi Arabia, along with 45 ballistic missiles and 7 cruise missiles. Saudi Arabia has fought back diplomatically up to this point. For instance, it has expelled Iranian military officials from its territory and declared several key members of the Iranian embassy in Saudi territory as persona non grata, forcing them to leave the kingdom within 24 hours of that announcement being made. But Iran hasn't stopped. If anything, it's escalated its missile and drone strikes in the wake of Prince bin Faisal's warning. Now, Saudi Arabia is gearing up to join a war that it never wanted to be a part of. Its hand has been forced, though the country is still playing it cagey when it comes to what its response will be and when it will come. This is military strategy 101, as Saudi Arabia is content to keep Iran guessing, as Prince bin Faisal explains. Do they have a day, 2, a week? The prince asked rhetorically, before adding, "I'm not going to telegraph that." What this tells us is that a counterattack is coming, we just don't know when. And more to the point, neither does Iran. As Prince bin Faisal declares that his country isn't intimidated by Iran's waves of aerial strikes, Iran is left wondering if it's miscalculated with its escalating missile and drone campaign against the country. Iran has long cherished its reputation as the bully of the Gulf region. In a moment, we're going to explain why that reputation will be in tatters if Saudi Arabia gets involved in the war against Iran. But first, there are signs that Saudi Arabia is indeed serious about striking back against Iran, albeit indirectly. For one, the country is finally allowing the US to use one of its key military bases for operations linked to Iran. Just one day after Prince bin Faisal delivered his warning, Iran International reported that Saudi Arabia has opened up the King Fahd Air Base in Taif to US forces as they continue their campaign to batter Iran during Operation Epic Fury. There are reasons why the US wanted to use this particular base. It lies deep enough in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia to be somewhat safe against Iran's missiles and drone strikes. Not 100% safe, but distance creates time, and time is what air defenses at the base need to ensure their counterattacks against incoming projectiles hit home. However, the base also provides the US with territory close enough to the Strait of Hormuz to enable it to launch strikes against Iran in that region, which is key, as Iran has used the blockading of that waterway as leverage during the operation. This is cooperation between Saudi Arabia and the US on a whole new level. Iran never saw it coming, and that is the miscalculation. Like the classic schoolyard bully, Iran has been trying to double down on its threats before a bigger, stronger kid enters the yard. That kid is now in Saudi Arabia, and the regime is running scared. And now Saudi Arabia is in the perfect position to get directly involved with Operation Epic Fury if and when it chooses. In a straight fight between Saudi Arabia and Iran, the latter has the advantage, at least on paper. That's according to Global Firepower, or GFP, which ranks military nations based on dozens of factors. GFP ranks Iran's military as the 16th strongest in the world, while Saudi Arabia comes in at number 25. On the manpower front, Iran has 610,000 active personnel, 350,000 reserves, and 220,000 paramilitary forces, compared to Saudi Arabia's 247,000 active service members, 0 reserves, and 150,000 paramilitary forces. On land, Iran has more tanks, over 3 times as many armored vehicles, and thousands more units of artillery. And at sea, Iran's fleet is about 3 times the size of Saudi Arabia's, and it includes 25 submarines, whereas Saudi Arabia has none. And yet Saudi Arabia spends more than 6 times as much as Iran on its military each year. How is that possible? You'll notice that we didn't examine air power in this comparison, and there's a big reason why that we'll get to in just a moment. First, the GFP comparison is all well and good, but it doesn't take into account the fact that Iran's military has already been rocked by Operations Epic Fury and Roaring Lion. Iran's military is built for a ground war, barring its use of missiles and drones, and that's going to be hard for it to pull off when Iran would have to cross the Persian Gulf to use its superior manpower and ground equipment against Saudi Arabia. That crossing has been made very difficult by the US targeting Iran's naval fleet. US Central Command says that US and Israeli attacks against Iran have already destroyed 100 of Iran's warships, which means most of the ground forces that Iran has are locked inside its own territory. And it gets worse for Iran's regime. By March 13th, US Secretary of War Pete Hegseth was claiming that the US and Israel had struck over 15,000 targets during the first 2 weeks of their joint operation against Iran. Almost 2 more weeks have passed, so that number is certain to have increased. Iran's missile launch volume is down 90%, with drone launches down to 95% compared to the first day of the war, which is an indicator that many of the country's launch sites have been taken out of commission. The Wall Street Journal adds to the numbers, noting on March 8th that Israel claims that 85% of Iran's air defense network has been destroyed, along with 70% of its ballistic missile firing capability. Iran's military is in crisis. And Saudi Arabia has a trick up its sleeve that counteracts all of the supposed advantage that Iran has. But before we dig deeper into what that trick is, this is a quick reminder that you are watching The Military Show. This is the kind of insight that you want. Make sure that you're subscribed to the channel. Now, a moment ago we told you that Saudi Arabia spends about 6 times more on its military than Iran. And we hinted that the Saudi Air Force is the reason why. The numbers tell part of the story per GFP. Saudi Arabia has 917 aerial assets compared to Iran's 551, including almost 100 more fighter jets, 4 times the number of dedicated attack aircraft, about twice the number of helicopters, and a fleet of 22 aerial refueling tankers compared to Iran's 6. This is where Saudi power would come into play if it decides to go to war with Iran. However, it goes even deeper. If you think Iran's air force sounds halfway decent based on the numbers, what GFP doesn't tell you is that Iran's airframes are ancient. The country is still operating F-4s and F-5s, which were impressive in their day, but that day has long since passed. Saudi Arabia, on the other hand, has a far more modern fleet that includes F-15 Eagles and Strike Eagles, Eurofighter Typhoons, and E-3 Sentry airborne early warning and control aircraft. On the F-15 front, the kingdom has 232 of various models of this fighter jet alone per global military. That's more than enough to put Iran's entire air force to shame. Think about how the US and Israel have been attacking Iran. It's been airstrike after airstrike, some involving the very Western fighter jets that Saudi Arabia brings to the table. If Saudi Arabia follows through on its threats, it wouldn't have to start an attritional ground war with Iran, which is the one area where Iran has the advantage. The Saudis could basically plug their far superior air force into Operation Epic Fury to magnify the already Iran-destroying air power that the US has brought to the table. And when you remember that Iran's air defense network has already been shattered, Saudi Arabian fighter jets and attack aircraft could operate almost all over the country's territory. The Iranian bully has already had its teeth kicked in, and Saudi Arabia could be perfectly positioned to break its jaw. Oh, and one more thing. Iran might be able to launch missiles at Saudi Arabia, but it's not like the Saudis are helpless on that front. As the International Institute of Strategic Studies, or IISS, points out, Saudi Arabia started developing a long-range surface-to-surface missile program in the 1980s, in response to seeing how missiles were key in the war between Iran and Iraq. The Royal Saudi Strategic Missile Force has at least 4 underground missile bases on its territory. The kingdom has also been purchasing missiles from China since at least the late 1980s, and according to the Arms Control Association, it has several types of missiles that can fly more than far enough to strike any target in Iran. These include the DF-3, which has a 2,600 km or 1,615 mile range, and the DF-21 East Wind, which can fly for over 2,100 km or about 1,300 miles. Earlier we said that Iran had miscalculated with its attacks against Saudi Arabia. That was an understatement. What Iran has been doing is poking a bear with a stick drizzled in honey, and it's about to have that stick shoved right back in its face. And if all that wasn't bad enough for the wannabe bully of the Gulf, Saudi Arabia isn't the only Gulf nation that is preparing to bite back against Iran's attacks on their territory. Several more are doing the same. What we may be seeing here is the early emergence of a Gulf alliance that, when combined with the US and Israel, will be enough to reduce Iran's regime to dust. As the Wall Street Journal reported on March 23rd, several other Gulf states are edging toward joining the fight against Iran, which isn't all that surprising, given that they face similar attacks to those that caused Saudi Arabia to issue its warning. The United Arab Emirates, or UAE, is among those other Gulf states. If anything, the UAE has had it worse than Saudi Arabia. WION News reports that the country's multi-layered air defenses had shot down 1,789 drones and 352 ballistic missiles by March 23rd, including 7 missiles and 16 drones on that very day. Iran is hitting the UAE constantly and is starting to formulate a response. That response isn't military. Yet. The UAE has the ability to do something that could cripple Iran economically if the regime doesn't back down from its attacks. The UAE has long had an economic partnership with Iran that has seen the latter use the UAE to get access to foreign reserve currencies. Right now, CNBC reports there are billions of dollars of Iranian money held in the UAE, and all the UAE has to do is pull the trigger and freeze Iran's access to that money to plunge the Iranian regime into financial turmoil. If the US were to add the taking of Karg Island onto that economic dogpile, which would deprive Iran of yet more billions by snatching away the terminal that is responsible for around 90% of Iran's oil exports, you get a catastrophe for the Iranian regime. There's only so long that a regime can survive without money, no matter how dogmatic its leaders might be. Once soldiers stop getting paid, they don't have the incentive to risk their lives to fight the US or the converging Gulf states. And when you remember that it was an economic crisis that kick-started the protests that indirectly led to Operation Epic Fury, there's a possibility that Iran's struggling economy completely crumbling could lead to a full uprising against the regime. The UAE hasn't pulled the trigger on freezing Iran's assets just yet, but it is cracking down on Iranian assets on its territory, the Wall Street Journal reports. The Iranian hospital and the Iranian club in Dubai have both been shut down, and the UAE says that it's taking measures to target Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, as its government states. Certain institutions directly linked to the Iranian regime and IRGC will be closed under targeted measures after having been found to have been misused to advance agendas that do not serve the Iranian people and in violation of UAE law. Debate still rages in the UAE about whether it should get its military involved. In Bahrain, we're already seeing some hints of direct involvement. According to AA, Bahrain reports that Iran has launched 147 missiles and 282 drones at its territory as of March 23rd. Again, we see Iran trying to be the Gulf bully. But long before that figure was made public, Bahrain already seemed to be cooperating with the US in Operation Epic Fury. On March 13th, the New York Times reported on a verified video that showed ballistic missiles being launched from Bahrain in the direction of Iran. Notably, Bahrain is also home to the US Navy's 5th Fleet, though it isn't yet clear if the launched missiles were American or Bahraini. We do know that at least one of the missiles was fired using American-made equipment, so at the very least, there is cooperation happening on the equipment level. What does the US have to say about all of this? Right now, the US is keeping its cards close to its chest. The country's military has declined to comment on whether the Gulf nations in question are helping directly with Operation Epic Fury, preferring to allow those nations to speak for themselves. Saudi Arabia has already done just that. It's delivered its warning, and like the US, it's keeping Iran guessing about what's happening. In the UAE, there is talk of asset freezing, and though Bahrain isn't saying much about getting involved in the fight, it's clear that bases in the country are being used to attack Iran. Iran is starting to reap what it sowed. The regime's strategy of causing chaos in the Gulf region was supposed to cause an outcry strong enough to convince the US that it was time to back down. The missiles and drones being launched against Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, the UAE, and the Gulf nations are meant to be haymakers delivered by the big bully. But those haymakers are being blocked, and the Gulf states are preparing to deliver shots of their own. They have to. Iran has forced their hands, and they need to protect the infrastructure that it's targeting. As for what happens next, there are a couple of options. The Gulf states could get directly involved with Operation Epic Fury. Saudi Arabia is in a great position to do so, as we explained earlier. So are Bahrain, the UAE, Qatar, Oman, and Kuwait, all of which have drones, cruise missiles, and ballistic missiles they could start sending Iran's way, the IISS reports. The UAE and Saudi Arabia even have access to exported Storm Shadow missiles, and we know how effective they've been in Ukraine's defense of its territory against Putin's invasion. Those missiles could be used to target Iran's launch sites, which would be made possible by the US and Israel sharing intelligence with the Gulf states. A second option is that the Gulf states could get involved in securing shipping in the Strait of Hormuz, through which 20% of the world's oil and liquefied natural gas passes. That would involve countering Iranian fast boats and drones, but it would also strip away the one major piece of leverage that Iran can currently lean on to pressure the US into giving up on Operation Epic Fury. Control over the Strait of Hormuz could even be used to stop tankers attempting to carry Iran's oil out of the country, which could add to the economic shock caused by the UAE freezing Iran's assets and the US taking Karg Island. As for Iran, it has to deal with the Gulf states preparing for an all-out war. The regime could bully those states for so long because it knew that Iran was strong enough to fight against any one of them. But Iran won't be fighting against one. It will be doing battle with several Gulf states, along with the US and Israel, and it will be trying to use a military that is hemmed into its own territory and helpless to stop the aerial bombardments that have ravaged Iran. This is what you get when you push too far. Iran has succeeded in creating the chaos that it wanted with its attacks on the Gulf states. It just never expected that chaos to land on its own doorstep. Speaking about things that Iran never expected, the US has been unleashing classified weapons on Iran throughout Operation Epic Fury. From attack drones to stealth-enhanced versions of the Tomahawk cruise missile, the US is hitting Iran with everything that the regime didn't even know the US had. Find out more in our video, and if you enjoyed this video, remember to subscribe to The Military Show as we continue our coverage of the situation in the Gulf. And thank you as always for watching.